Okay, Kevin, teach us before I start on the Gemara share.
Okay.
Dedications.
So, dedication to all the soldiers that they should be victorious and in destroying the enemy and returning home safely, and assist in returning the hostages, and that the hostages should be freed, and that if need be, the soldiers can free the hostages also unscathed.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I hope all the Jews in Klal Yisrael are safe and all over Eretz Yisrael and the land is safe. All right.
Amen. Okay, so this Parshat Vayishlach, which is this week's Parsha, some very interesting things. And one of the main issues that's discussed is that Yaakov leaves the house of Lavan, the trickster, and he got message that he's being pursued by Esav, and he's very scared. Esav wanted to kill him after the death of Yitzchak. So what he does is he prepares gifts, and he puts the children and the woman at the back of the traveling entourage for protection. And even though he's in the right, he prepares for the worst, and then they meet up, and they embrace Yaakov and Esav embrace each other, and they weep. And Yaakov actually bows down to, he calls him my master. So this might seem like going overboard, even though Yaakov was quite rightly got the birthright, and was designated to take on the responsibilities of future generations of the Jewish people. He did that just in case. So this teaches us, even though maybe we're in the right, we don't always have to force the issue. And sometimes if we give in or compromise in certain circumstances, it's not the end of the world to do such a thing if the end result will be positive. I know it's happened with me, and where we think we're in the right, and we probably are most of the time, but sometimes we can't. It may not be worth it just to be forceful and force the issue. Rather, just let go of something, of a machloket or a dispute. Rather, just give in depending on the circumstance, because at the end of the day, that might be the best approach going forward.
It's actually ironic how pertinent it is right now, because the whole country is united behind for one common purpose, and everyone's putting away their differences and their machlokeses. So this is the ultimate test that we're kind of having in our generation. I think one of the greatest tests of our time. And I think it's phenomenal that Hashem's given us that opportunity to unite us like this. Obviously in sad circumstances, but obviously it had to happen. All right.
That's very. Thank you for adding to that.
Yeah. No, I just thought, because it's just such a strong connection to what's going on there right now.
No, it is. It's very good point. I didn't think of that. That is a good point.
Oh, it is a good point. Okay. All right, guys. Just a quick summary of the what was covered on yesterday. Quickly, is that a Mishnah was basically saying, let me just see where the noise is coming from. Well, okay.
Not from me.
No, it's gone. Okay. Similarly, should one find a swarm of bees, if it is known that the owner is despaired of retrieving them, they are his. So the Gemara asked, what is the Mishnah's main purpose in adding that clause? Similarly, should one find a swarm of bees, with the emphasis being on similar? It said that what was not taught in the preceding section is that in the case of one who rescues things from a river, troops or bandits, if it's known that the owners have despaired of retrieving them, they are his. which is pretty straightforward. It basically said, we learned that if you rescue property after Ye'ush, you acquire it. And the only reason we found it necessary to add the same applies in the case of the bees is that maybe you're thinking that bees shouldn't be that different. But it is a little bit different. Firstly, that the Gemara says, even if you find a lost item and there's Ye'ush, it's the right thing to give it back to your brothers, that's for sure. And it's a Kiddush Hashem to give it back to the Goyim if you're in a Jewish suburb. There's a difference between the letter of the law and the actual law. But the one thing that you've got to realize is, as far as bees and birds are concerned, they tend to fly away. And since they tend to fly away, under biblical law, you can't really own them. They're ownerless, okay, in a certain sense, because they have the freedom of movement. So even if the nest in one's property, even if they nest in your property, they're legally ownerless. But to avoid any disputes over their ownership between two neighbors, the rabbis basically said, listen, you can acquire bees and birds that nest on your property at that point, but it's a rabbinic thing. So in that case, we can be lenient in allowing the rescuer to keep them, even if it's not known with certainty that the owner despaired. That would be the way that you could think, perhaps, that it worked out, because it's a rabbinical enactment. Okay. Now, it's a little bit of a different case, because we said that you could come to that assumption, and that's why our Mishnah stated that if the intent is not known, you can't assume that there's necessarily despair. The only time you can know there's despair is if you've got some form of evidence. Now, the Mishnah stated, okay, so we see there's a rabbinic prohibition against keeping bees, and it does hold some weight. So the Mishnah says that it goes on to a different subject, and it says, Rav Yochanan ben Baroka said a woman or a mana is believed to say that, listen, Reuven was chasing after his bees and it landed on Shimon's property. And we said yesterday that it can't be because the court does not rely on the testimony of women or minors to establish evidence, simply because they are swayed emotionally and they haven't reached a full level of what the court would say in terms of legislation maturity. So as far as that's concerned, we're saying, how can it be allowed here? And we're saying very simply, there's two different issues. When a woman appears in court and she knows that it's going to have ramifications of a loss or a benefit to somebody, there's a lot of pressure on her to lie, especially if she's married and her husband would not be happy that her formal testimony might have cost one of his friends money, for example. And obviously children are minors, and therefore they haven't reached emotional and intellectual maturity yet. We are saying is here it was a different case, and that is a case, just hang on one sec. That is a case of a conversation that was witnessed when casually they thought there was no consequence to their action. So mother said to her son, hey, Reuben's chasing after his bees. I think they've gone into Shimon's property. So therefore the court can rely on that sort of testimony, because it wasn't the same sort of pressurized testimony as official testimony. It was mainly recording a conversation with another witness to say, listen, we know the identity of the original bee owners, we know what transpired, and it has a case history. So the Gemara said, are a woman and mana eligible to serve as witnesses? And as far as the Gemara is concerned, in Shavuos 30a and Bava Basra 155b, not in an official capacity, but here it's reasonable because they were talking casually. So the Gemara cites an Amoraik ruling about the casual talk as evidence. It says, is there any other time that a woman's testimony or a minor's testimony is accepted when it's not official testimony And we say, yes, Rav Ashi said, although in general we don't treat casual talk as valid testimony, except in the case of testimony required to allow a woman to remarry. And what we said is, for example, if children were saying that, listen, they're going to eulogize and bury so-and-so, then we can rely on their casual talk, because the so-and-so in this case had in fact died, and that woman was in a quasi-state of limbo because she was a naguna. It's a woman permanently restrained from remarrying because we don't know what happened to the husband. We're not saying it's in a case of war where he signs a bill of divorce should he disappear for more than 60 days, for example. This is a case where he just ducked. And we're saying what could have happened? He could have stepped off the train track, been hit by not a train, because otherwise for sure he'd be dead. But maybe he just fell and got concussed, and there was a hemorrhage in the brain, and eventually he died. But he fell off a train station at another town. He was meant to come back. Nobody knew what happened to him because he was shipped off to a hospital. And we say that we can rely on hearsay to a certain degree, just to allow to get remarried. But Rav Ashi's ruling is challenged. If you remember, Ravina said to Rav Ashi, and is casual talk not treated as valid testimony in any other situation? Meaning, is this a standalone case? But in our Mishnah's case, for the swarm of bees, the witness is talking casually, and yet we can rely on him. In other words, the general nature of Rav Ashi's statement is that we don't treat casual talk as valid testimony, etc., implies almost that you never rely on casual talk, even when there's supporting circumstantial evidence. And obviously it appears to preclude relying on casual talk in the case of bees, even when the owner is chasing after them. So what we are saying is here is the Gemara answers, listen, there are certain reasons. As we learned before with the Naguna, there was a leniency to allow to get remarried. In this particular case, with regards to a swarm of bees, its acquisition is valid only under rabbinical law, because we said quite clearly that bees and birds are able to flap away. So you can't really own them or keep them in captivity as such. So we allow that person to keep it rabbinically if it's settled in his property, but it is a little bit flexible. And then we figured, well, if it's flexible, then what does that mean? Does it mean despair has taken place automatically? And we're saying, no, it's not the case where you found something and that's biblically prohibited to keep it if the owner hasn't despaired. And even if he has, it's the right thing to give it back, even though your ush has taken place and you can keep it. So the Gemara asks further, so we see the difference between rabbinic law, that it almost allows that if there is casual evidence, it's accepted for rabbinical law, but not the Raisa. So the Gemara says, okay, so if you're looking at respect to biblical law, is there never a case where we rely on casual talk? And we say, but there was a case of Rav Yehuda who said in the name of Shmuel, it once happened that a certain man was talking casually and he said, I remember when I was a child and I was young enough to be riding on my father's shoulder, and they took me out of school. They removed the tunic on my head and they immersed me in a mikveh so that I would be able to eat terum at night. Okay. And he said, my friends would tease me. They'd keep away from me because their parents wanted me to keep away from them, and because they would infect me, because all kids are generally girls in the state of tumah, because they play with mud and sand and their sheretz is there, and insects and what do you call it, lizards and reptiles that have died. So they had to keep away from him in order that he wouldn't become tumah from the mikveh, and he could take part in the teruma. And they teased him. They called him Yochanan Chalaita. And Rebbe heard the story and decided to elevate him to the kohuna of being a kohen based on his word. In other words, Rebbe allowed him to eat teruma as an adult. And this is almost a proof that the Gemara is saying that we do allow casual talk even in matters of rabbinical law. And the Gemara says, no, well, you have to have a look at it carefully when Rebbe was going around and when Rav Yochanan and Rav Chanina were around. And we say, listen, this is post-destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. So teruma in that case is only rabbinic. And therefore there was a leniency. It wasn't pre-temple or pre-second temple. So the Gemara says, all right, so you still want to maintain that with respect to biblical law, we can't rely on any casual talk. You can with Rabbanan, rabbinical law, but biblical law, there's never a case where we rely on casual talk as evidence. And it says, no, look, there's another case. There's Rav Dimi, who came from Eretz Yisrael to Babylonia, and he said that Rav Chana of Carthage, and others say that it was Rav Acha of Carthage, related that there was an incident that came before Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, and others say that the incident came before Rebbe. Okay, so there was a certain boy who was speaking casually and said, look, my mother and I were taken captives amongst idolaters. And when I would go out to draw water, my mind was on my mother. And when I would go out on wood, my mind was on my mother. Basically, I followed my mother everywhere because I didn't want her to be alone with these guys. Because the general default position is, unfortunately, Hamas isn't just a new case now. Whenever you're dealing with these Middle Eastern people, whether that were from Ishmael, whether it was Islam or pre-Islam, when they had captives, they violated them. So the default position is that she wouldn't generally be permitted to marry a Kohen because the assumption is if she was kidnapped, she was violated. But here, this boy casually said he was with his mother all the time, like stuck to her like glue. And therefore, in the case of a captured woman, what happens is Rebbe permitted her to marry a Kohen on the strength of his son's words. So it says, look, this seems to be evidence that we rely on casual talk even in regard to biblical law. Okay? How do we know this? Because in Leviticus, Vayikra chapter 21, verse 7, and Yevamos, the 68th to the 69th daf, it says a Kohen may not marry a woman that was abducted by idolaters. Because there's a presumption that they violated her, guys. And therefore that's derisa in Leviticus. But Rebbe allowed this abducted woman to marry a Kohen based on the son's remarks. So we're saying, well, why is this the case? And we're saying, look, in the case of a captured woman, the rabbis were lenient. So you could say, well, how could they be lenient if the source wasn't a Rabbanan? It was actually derisa from Vayikra, from Leviticus. And we're saying, look, the reason being is it wasn't a guarantee she was violated. It's a possibility. How do we know? There's a principle of a chazaka I said to you yesterday. What's a chazaka? Presumed status. So if I sit in the same seat for months at a time, at least more than 3 times, that's presumed to be my seat. So it says there seems to be a presumed status of violation when there's kidnapping involved. But with regards to a question that arises as to whether a change in legal status took place, we're basically presuming that the status quo prevailed. In other words, we don't know she was violated. So under this principle, biblical law even, derisa allows the Kohen to marry the captured woman because she presumably retained her permitted status during her abduction. It's not guaranteed at all. In fact, it's more likely that she was violated, but it's only because the son was there to rely on his casual talk, because this is the key point, is that the prohibition against a marriage with a Kohen is only rabbinic as far as an abductee is concerned. If she was with a non-Jew, Gavin, then for sure, that's derisa. But if she was captured, that presumption is rabbinic. That's what it's saying. Okay, I'm just telling you, emphasizing you because she's a Kohen. Okay, then we dealt with this ruling about that we're dealing with now, is that if you have to enter another person's field and you damage something, you've got to pay for it, but that's an accidental damage. And the general Tana Kamma says you may not cut off a branch of his fellow's tree to save his bees, even if you intend to pay compensation. You can't do it on purpose. If there's damage, you can pay, but not creating it a premeditated act of damage in order to compensate the person. But we said that Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, says that you can cut off a branch with intent to make restitution. So the following brisa gives the basis for this and two similar rulings by Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka. It was taught in the brisa that he said it's a stipulation of the court that one may go down into the field of his fellow and cut off his fellow's branch to save his swarm of bees. And the owner of the branch takes payment for the branch from the swarm of his fellow. In other words, the beekeeper obviously must reimburse the owner for that part of the tree that he damaged. And it's a stipulation of the court. If you remember, we did do this before, that one shall spill out his wine from his barrow and save the honey of his fellow in an empty barrel. So in other words, if you have got wine and your fellow Jew has got honey, you need to empty out your wine in order to save his honey, and you can take payment for his wine from the honey of his fellow. Okay? I mean, we're also dealing with this in the next Mishnah because it speaks of two people who encountered each other in the street, one carrying a jug of wine and the other a jug of honey. The honey jar cracked. The owner of the wine spilled out his wine to save the more expensive honey. That's the emphasis. So the Mishnah rules that he is not entitled to compensation for the loss of his wine because that's the general rabbinic opinion. But Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, disagrees that you can claim compensation. And even the Rosh says that the owner of the wine is entitled to full compensation only if the owner of the honey asked him to spill out his wine to save the honey. So, according to the Rosh, it's not automatic. According to the Rosh, you have to say to the person, listen, I'm happy to throw away my wine and save your honey, but I want to know you're going to pay me back. It's not a default position of automatic assumption. Okay? That's according to the Rosh. According to Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, you're fully entitled to it. And according to the Bava Kamma, you're not entitled to it. So that was the second example. The first one was obviously cutting off your fellow's branch to save your swarm of bees. You can do. You can expect that if you throw away your wine to save honey, you get it repaid. And it says, listen, it's the same thing. If you've got wood on your donkey and your fellow has got flax on his donkey and the donkey died, you can take the load on your donkey and lose the wood and take payment for that wood in order to save his flax. Okay? Now, which is more expensive. Now, how do we know this? Because according to this opinion, Joshua gave the Jewish people possession of the land, meaning Eretz Israel, on condition that they observe these practices, meaning that a brisa lists 10 enactments promulgated by Yeshua, where he allocated Eretz Israel to the Jewish people. Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, maintains that Joshua passed these 3 laws as well. Okay? Now, we have got 10 minutes left. I would suggest we end now because we're going to do a new Mishnah tomorrow. I'm sure you guys are grateful.
Damon, so just go over, about 2 minutes ago, you said something about payment and that when you were talking about the honey and the wine, if someone's jug of honey broke,
okay, so
empty out the wine, put the honey into the honey's value. But then you said something about payment. Sorry, I didn't get.
Sure.
That
so there are two Jews. There are two Jews in the street. I see you have got very expensive honey, and your jar's cracked. It's ceramic, and you're losing honey. I quickly throw out my wine and I rescue your honey. Now, accordingly, there are 3 opinions. The Bava Kamma says you're not entitled to pay me for that. That's the general rabbinic opinion. Okay. Now, Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, says you are entitled to pay me for that because you would have lost a more expensive product, and therefore it's in your interest to pay me for the wine because you still would have lost far more had you just lost your honey. So because your honey was worth a hell of a lot more than the wine. It was the same
So-
example with flax and wood. Your flax is worth more than my wood. So he said, of course you have to pay me back. And the reason why you have to pay me back, according to him, is that nobody, if they're not going to get compensated, is going to volunteer to save your expensive honey. You're going to be in trouble. So therefore, that default position is you're losing less money by just compensating me for the lower cost one as opposed to expensive honey, and you should pay me. According to the Rosh, who seeks a balance between Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, and the Tana Kamma, the rabbinic opinion is, he says, you've got to ask the person, if I see you losing honey, I say, Kevin, I'm happy to throw away my wine, but if I throw away my wine, will you compensate me? Then I can save your honey. And if you say no, you lose your honey. If you say yes, then you've agreed to it. So that's the middle of the road opinion.
Okay, but then they had a guy who forsook his wine needs to be compensated because he provided the kli.
He doesn't have to be. There are three opinions: the general rabbinic opinion, or the Tana Kamma turns around and says, no, you're not compensated. And the opposite extreme of the opinion is taught by Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, who says you have to be compensated. In the middle of the opinion of the Rosh, who says before you help the other guy, check if he's prepared to compensate you, because the general rabbinic opinion is he doesn't have to. So those are the three opinions. Yeah, that's it.
If that jug belongs, the guy that owns the wine has to be asked permission that he can give up his use his jar.
No. He doesn't have to be asked permission. The person with the wine has to say, well, are you going to pay me back for my wine?
He offers. He
says,
jar.
I'm happy to, according to the Rosh, he says, I'm happy to help you, but I don't want to lose money on my wine. Will you compensate?
Yeah, of course.
To save you more expensive product? If the guy says no, he's stupid. And according to Rav Yishmael, the son of Rav Yochanan ben Baroka, you have to compensate him because he's doing you a favor, and you'd be silly not to.
Of course, and
according to the Tana Kamma, he doesn't have to be compensated at all. So therefore, the Rosh's opinion is just ask first before you do the right thing and end up being out of pocket.
And also, it's a Damon. If the owner of the honey doesn't offer to compensate the guy who has the wine, and he loses it, then he mustn't whine about losing his honey.
That's what is that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's very funny.